Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. One of Jeffrey Epstein's survivors, Jennifer Araoz, has sued Ghislaine Maxwell in the Manhattan Supreme Court under the Child Victims Act. This suit took place on Monday. And it calls into question, in my opinion, what's going on with the compensation fund. Because remember, if you opted into that compensation fund and you were going to get a payout from that compensation fund, then you had to halt your cases against Ghislaine Maxwell, your civil suits, etc., etc. Well, it certainly looks like Jennifer here is not going that route. It looks like she's decided to sue Ghislaine Maxwell, and I would guess that would preclude her from a payout from the compensation fund. Now, we really haven't gotten much information about the compensation fund since we heard it went live, but if we're seeing this situation like this, and this survivor go after Ghislaine in another suit, well, I think that you would have to come to the conclusion that the compensation fund, at least as far as this survivor goes, is not up to par. And with that in mind, Jennifer Araoz, the survivor in question here, has decided to sue Ghislaine Maxwell in the Manhattan Supreme Court. So obviously we're going to keep our eye on this and see what goes down as far as the lawsuit and what this means towards a compensation claim for her. But again, this is all very confusing, right? All of this stuff is crazy because we don't have all of the information available to us. So we got to try and put things together. But I would think, and I would certainly go out on a limb here and take a wild guess, that Jennifer is most certainly not taking anything from the compensation fund if she's going this next step and suing Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, again, I'm not positive that's the case, right? I mean, there might be some sort of other angle that we're not aware of here. But as far as I know, if you're going after the associates of Jeffrey Epstein or his employees, that makes it so you are not able to make a claim against the compensation fund. So I'm very interested to see where this goes. And we know that previously when she made her claims that Jennifer Araoz also named other people in a lawsuit previously. And one of those people happened to be Leslie Groff. And in that previous complaint, it was Leslie Groff was the secretary, Kimberly Espinoza was the executive assistant, and Ghislaine Maxwell was his accomplice. And that was what the original complaint read. And now we have this new action by the survivor here, Jennifer Araoz, and it is suing Ghislaine Maxwell in the Manhattan Supreme Court. So I would guess that her and her team came to an impasse with the compensation fund, and they decided that the best route for them was to pursue their case in other avenues, in other venues. Because obviously what was going on down there as far as the compensation fund, it wasn't something that they thought was acceptable to their client. And that's just speculation on my part, because if things were going correctly down there for them, you would think that they would hold off on this lawsuit and see the process through with the compensation fund. But without that occurring, I guess that we see here the next step, right? We see the next step and how some of these girls are going to go about this if they feel like they're not being taken care of correctly by the compensation fund. And again, I haven't heard anything in the news from any of the survivors talking about it, right? So I'm not too sure which way it's going, and I'm just speculating here why she would be filing this suit, but you would have to think that it has to do with the compensation package being offered by the executors and those who are running the fund is not acceptable to her and her team. So let's jump into our article today and see what the New York Post has to say. This article is from the New York Post. The headline: Ghislaine Maxwell sued by Jeffrey Epstein accuser over trafficking allegations. This piece was authored by Elizabeth Rosner and Rebecca Rosenberg. Jeffrey Epstein accuser Jennifer Araoz sued Ghislaine Maxwell on Monday for helping the dead pedophile recruit her as a sex slave at the age of 14. So you see what I'm talking about with the compensation fund, right? With the language in the compensation fund, it would seem to me that Mrs. Araoz here is going after her own pursuit as far as compensation goes, and she's not going to partake in the compensation fund. And that's the way it looks, right? I mean, unless I'm missing something here, but it certainly looks to me that she has decided to strike out on her own and go after Maxwell in this Manhattan Supreme Court suit. So I'm interested to get some clarification as the day moves forward and we hear more about this story. But it certainly looks to me, as of right now, that whatever happened with their negotiations with Indike and Kahn and Feldman and the compensation fund either collapsed or were not acceptable to her. The lawsuit, filed in a Manhattan Supreme Court under the Child Victims Act, alleges that Maxwell used Epstein's wealth and power as a method to recruit her and other female victims. We've heard that story several times, right? How Maxwell was used to bring comfort to these girls, get them comfortable with the situation, and then she would deliver them to the jaws of the beast. And not only that, she would also, in some instances, participate in the abuse herself. The 32-year-old alleges that Maxwell provided organizational support to Epstein's sex trafficking ring, identifying and hiring the recruiters of underage girls for Epstein's sexual pleasure. So what we're hearing here is, from Miss Araoz, is that Ghislaine Maxwell was in charge of hiring the recruiters and she was charged with organizing the recruiters. Like we all knew, she was the top of that pyramid there. She was in charge of making sure they did all of their duties and that the criminal enterprise was facilitated. And we see that here in the suit. Maxwell also scheduled massage appointments for Epstein with the girls. As a result of Maxwell conspiring with Epstein, Araoz claims she suffered from physical injury, pain, emotional distress, psychological trauma, mental anguish, humiliation, embarrassment, loss of self-esteem, loss of dignity, invasion of her privacy, and a loss of her capacity to enjoy life. All of that sounds absolutely legit, right? Physical injury, check. Pain, check. Emotional distress, check. Psychological trauma, yep, that occurred. Mental anguish, you would think. Humiliation, that certainly fits the bill. Embarrassment, yep, that as well. Loss of self-esteem, yeah, you would think somebody getting abused by these sick bastards would lose all kinds of self-esteem, right? Loss of dignity, well, that certainly falls under the category of that probably happened. I mean, can you imagine how you would feel? And to have to live with that day after day? Wondering why you were chosen to be abused by these sick people, thinking there was something wrong with you, thinking that it was your fault. And that's what these survivors have lived with ever since then. And it's absolutely disgusting to see that the compensation fund obviously is not working towards making that right. Araoz had been the first person to sue Epstein's estate under New York's Child Victims Act in July 2019, which was eventually tossed out after he died. So she was suing him in the process of suing him when he died. And then, obviously, according to New York law, you can't sue somebody who is dead already. So they had to toss that case out. So, I mean, you go after the estate, obviously, but the person, not so much. In August 2019, she sued Epstein's estate, Maxwell, and 3 unnamed female household staff members. That lawsuit is still active. And we just talked about who that was. Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, Kimberly Espinoza, Leslie Groff. So there were several people that she named that were all, people that are Jeffrey Epstein co-conspirators or alleged to be Jeffrey Epstein co-conspirators. And that suit that they were named in is still active. So this is another suit on top of the one that she already has going on. And I think that, again, what we can take from this article is it shows us that there's not much movement here with the compensation fund. At least not in this case. Because if there was, you would think that these suits would be halted and they would get the money, the reparations that they deserve from Epstein's estate. But instead, it looks like that they're going after Maxwell and they're going after her in this manner because they couldn't come to a resolution elsewhere. I am once again able to take another breath as Ghislaine Maxwell will be in jail until at least her trial date next July. Araoz said after she was denied bail, knowing that she is incarcerated for the foreseeable future allows me and my fellow survivors to have faith that we are on the right path. Lawyers for Araoz did not immediately return request for comment. So again, we're still seeing these lawsuits pop up even with the Survivor Compensation Fund in play. And it just makes me wonder what is really going on with that Survivors Compensation Fund. I know personally I have zero faith in Darren Indyke and Khan being executors of that fund. And I don't care who the administrators are, what other projects they worked on, the 9/11 compensation fund, whatever it may be. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is that this fund is administered properly. There are thousands of dollars being spent to house Epstein's old planes. And what is that? Why? Sell them ASAP. Get rid of them. Put them on one of Jeffrey Epstein's huge properties. Why do they have to be put in storage somewhere? And meanwhile, as these idiots in the executors of the estate continue to play their games, money continues to be siphoned off of the estate that could be going to these survivors. So I'd really like to see what's going on with that compensation fund. I'd like to get an update. I'd like to see somebody come out and talk about what's going on, where we're at with it. But again, we're at the, we got to wait for the courts to do that. We got to wait for the courts to say it's okay or whatever the process may be. But this doesn't give me very much faith that things are moving in a correct direction. With Miss Araoz filing this suit on yesterday, in New York, you would think that it is not a good look, at least from her point of view, and her team have decided to move in a different direction. And I wonder how many of the survivors and their lawyers are looking at the offers from the compensation fund and are not finding those offers acceptable. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what goes on here in the next few weeks as far as the compensation fund goes. and to see what goes on with with Jennifer Araoz's suit here. Because if it keeps moving through the courts and we see it doesn't get paused or halted or anything like that, then that indicates to me at least that the compensation fund is not off to a very good start. So we will definitely keep our eye on that. All the other things that are going on, obviously we're watching that closely as well. So as these things break, we will continue to cover them. These lawsuits that we see against Jeffrey Epstein, if the compensation fund, if that happens to break down, we will see an enormous amount of suits like this, and from many, many, many survivors. So I think it definitely behooves the estate to do the right thing. But when you're dealing with Indike and Khan, you probably should never expect the right thing to be done. If you'd like to contact me, you could do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, I'll be back later on.